Israel and Palestine are often argued as if history could settle them. Find the first real people, the original name, the decisive conquest, and the case seems closed. But the land between the Mediterranean and the Jordan does not hold still inside that argument. The deeper you go, the less the past looks like a chain of ownership, and the more it looks layered. People already there, others arriving, rulers passing over, older attachments surviving under newer names. Across centuries, political control changed again and again, but the land did not begin again with each change. Not because this land lacks origins, but because it has too many. The land between the Mediterranean and the Jordan was already old with human use before anyone tried to turn it into a historical verdict. Its hills were terraced. Its stone was cut and reused. Its caves and tombs were folded into the routines of settlement and burial. Communities formed around springs, arable pockets, grazing routes, and defensible rises. Some places thickened into towns, others contracted, shifted, or were rebuilt nearby. Across thousands of years, people learned the narrow margins of this landscape, where grain survived, where herds could move, where water held longest, where movement from coast to upland or valley to desert could be controlled, taxed, or endured. Nothing about that world suggests an empty stage waiting for a single defining people. The southern Levant was never sealed off from its surroundings. It sat in the path of traders, armies, migrants, and ideas moving between Egypt, Syria, Mesopotamia, and Arabia. Drought could reorder life as much as war. A settlement might prosper because a route changed, then fade when conditions shifted again. But the broader pattern was not disappearance. People remained. They adapted to the same topography, returned to the same water sources, built over older foundations, and lived among the physical remains of earlier lives, sometimes close enough to touch them without knowing their names. Everything that follows looks different once that older depth comes into view. Before the land became a problem to be solved through names, texts, and conquests, it was a place of repeated habitation, use, memory, and return. Its first historical reality was not exclusive possession, but accumulated presence. By the time more familiar peoples and kingdoms come into view, they are entering a landscape already inhabited, already worked, and already dense with inherited traces. The argument has not even started, but the ground beneath it is already crowded. Names appear more clearly now, the kind later centuries will seize and hold too tightly. In the hill country, the lowlands, along the coast, and beyond the Jordan, small kingdoms and city-states took shape in a landscape already settled, farmed, fortified, and fought over for generations. Israelites and Judahites emerged there, but so did Philistines, Phoenicians, Moabites, Edomites, Arameans, and other neighboring peoples, whose borders were never as clean on the ground as they would later look on maps. The temptation is to imagine these groups arriving fully formed, as if ancient identity worked like a flag planted in untouched soil. The evidence points to something less theatrical and more human. Hill country settlements expanded. Older Canaanite patterns did not simply vanish. Languages separated and overlapped. Religious life was local, contested, and uneven, with shrines, high places, dynastic cults, and emerging claims of exclusivity existing in the same world. Trade moved across political lines. So did raiding, marriage, tribute, labor, and memory. A kingdom could insist on difference while still sharing habits, materials, and vulnerabilities with the people just beyond its frontier. That makes these populations no less real, only less usable as beginnings. Israelites and Judahites were rooted in the land, but not alone in it, and not outside the region that formed them. Their story unfolded among neighbors who were also building lineages, defending territories, and attaching themselves to the same contested ground. Ancient belonging here was seldom singular. It was made through fields, walls, sanctuaries, and dynasties, through pressure from rivals nearby and from larger powers beyond. By the time these names harden into the political vocabulary of the age, the land is already crowded with competing local worlds, and the horizon is beginning to darken with empires large enough to reduce all of them to provinces, tributaries, or memories. Then the horizon no longer belonged to the small kingdoms alone. What had been a landscape of neighboring rivalries was drawn into systems large enough to treat whole regions as assets to be counted, taxed, punished, and moved. Assyria came first with that harder scale of power, then Babylon, then Persia, later the Hellenistic kingdoms in Rome. Each arrived differently, but all imposed the same fact. Decisions made far beyond the Jordan or the coastal plain could break dynasties, empty treasuries, redirect labor, and reorder life across the country at once. That kind of rule did not simply conquer cities, it compressed local worlds. A hill kingdom that had measured itself against its nearest enemies now had to survive imperial tribute, census, military passage, and the possibility of deportation. Temples became political as well as sacred. Local elites were watched, replaced, or absorbed. Roads mattered differently. Grain mattered differently. Even distance changed because the village and the provincial capital were now tied to courts and armies far beyond the land itself. Imperial records often make this look clean, as if conquest converted complexity into administration. On the ground, it was not clean. On the ground, it was harsher. Extraction, compliance, negotiation, revolt, reprisal. And yet, empire, for all its violence, could only rule through what it found already there. Fields still had to be planted, terraces repaired, water managed, storehouses filled. Armies marched across inhabited country, not abstraction. When a kingdom fell, the royal language of the place might vanish faster than the settlement pattern beneath it. When elites were displaced, villages often endured. Even destruction did not create emptiness so much as altered continuities. Populations reduced, reshuffled, subordinated, but still living within the same worked landscape. Empire pressed on the land in exactly that way. It did not erase the older human depth. It pressed down on it, organized it, exploited it, renamed parts of it, and carried pieces of it into wider worlds. What changed first was the scale of power overhead. What changed more slowly was life below, where older attachments remained long enough to pass into the next layer. As imperial centuries accumulated, the land became harder to describe in a single vocabulary. The same hills, roads, towns, and shrines were now being named, taxed, prayed over, and remembered through different languages at once. Aramaic endured across everyday life and administration for long stretches. Greek entered with conquest and prestige. Latin marked Roman power more than local intimacy. Later, Arabic spread through rule, worship, law, and habit. None of these simply replaced what came before in a single motion. Official language could change quickly. The language of memory often did not. Names followed the same pattern. Provinces were redrawn. Districts were relabeled. Cities were refounded, embellished, or folded into new administrative maps. A ruler could rename a place by decree, and a mapmaker could make the change look final. But names do not move through the landscape all at the same speed. They settle unevenly. An imperial term might dominate records, while older place memory survived in villages, pilgrimage, burial, or local speech. The land kept acquiring new descriptions without surrendering all the older ones. Later arguments over names become misleading for exactly that reason. A changed label can suggest a changed origin, when it may only mark a changed regime. Religion deepened the layering. Jewish life remained rooted in the land through altered institutions, legal traditions, and forms of communal endurance. Samaritan continuity persisted beside it. Christianity emerged there, then spread outward and returned with new patronage, monuments, and sacred geography. Later, Islam entered not an untouched world, but one already dense with inherited sanctity, argument, and attachment. Sacred sites were not simply replaced, they were reinterpreted, contested, shared, monumentalized, or absorbed into new religious worlds. By this point, the land was no longer just ruled in succession, it was being described in layers. New languages named it, new faiths sanctified it, new administrations organized it, yet older attachments remained lodged within the newer frame, waiting to shape the worlds that followed. By the medieval and early modern centuries, rootedness in this land no longer needed grand political language to be real. It was built into ordinary life. Muslims, Christians, and Jews lived unevenly across the region, concentrated differently from one town or district to another, but tied to the same orchards, wells, market roads, shrines, workshops, and burial grounds. A village knew empire mostly at a distance, a tax demand, a governor's order, a passing column of soldiers, the interruption of a harvest. What made a place feel like home was usually nearer than that and more stubborn. It lived in the field boundary, the courtyard, the quarter, the cistern, the family tomb, in the local saint, in the seasonal return to the same grove. That did not mean harmony. Rule remained unequal, and communities did not stand in symmetrical relation to power. Some were favored, others constrained. Some periods were stable, others fractured by famine, rebellion, confiscation, plague, or war. But even through that instability, life kept fastening itself to the ground in ways no dynasty fully controlled. Courts recorded marriages, inheritances, debts, leases, disputes over water, disputes over walls, disputes over trees. Pilgrims arrived with one kind of attachment, cultivators carried another. Merchants, clergy, and townspeople added still more. None of this looked like the clean language of later national claim, but it created something older and harder to dismiss: accumulated belonging. That older reality disappears when the centuries before modern nationalism are treated as empty prelude. The region was not waiting between antiquity and the present for history to resume. Under Ayyubid, Mamluk, and Ottoman rule, among others, people were already living long lives in the same towns and villages, inheriting houses, restoring shrines, tending groves, and burying generations in the same soil. By the time modern movements began demanding exclusive futures, they entered a land where attachment was already local, layered, and old enough to make every simplified claim run into someone else's memory. By the modern period, the past was no longer just remembered, it was assembled into claims. Under the pressure of nationalism, imperial collapse, colonial administration, mass migration, and organized violence, older layers of memory were pulled into a new grammar: claim, counterclaim, proof, priority, return. A new way of arguing about the past. Ancient kingdoms, sacred texts, continuous residence, imperial records, legal categories, and demographic facts could all be summoned into the same case, even when they belonged to different kinds of history and answered different kinds of questions. The argument was no longer only over the land, it was over which past could speak for it. Here, confusion hardens into something more durable. A people can have ancient roots without that fact resolving modern sovereignty. Long residence can matter without functioning as an exclusive title deed. A religious bond is not the same thing as uninterrupted political control. Conquest, cultivation, worship, memory, law, exile, and return all carry historical weight, but they do not fit together neatly enough to produce a single verdict everyone must accept. In this region especially, each attempt to simplify the record tends to sharpen one strand by cutting away the others. No wonder the search for the one true beginning fails. There is no shortage of history here. There is too much of it, and too much of it remained alive. Too many generations buried their dead in the same ground, prayed toward the same places, rebuilt after the same destructions, and attached continuity to different moments in the same long story. What looks from a distance like an argument over origins is often an argument over which layer of a crowded past will be allowed to stand for the whole, and which living inheritances will be told they arrived too late. The question was never going to be settled by finding the first arrival, the original name, or the conquest treated as final. Those questions endure because they promise clarity, and this land has rarely offered it. Between the Mediterranean and the Jordan, rulers changed, borders shifted, official languages rose and fell, but the deeper fact remained: habitation. People stayed, adapted, remembered, and inherited landscapes already marked by earlier lives. The past matters here precisely because it resists being used cleanly. This is not a land without history deep enough to matter. It is a land with too much of it. Too many communities carried real attachments to the same ground across different centuries under different names. Too many beginnings remained alive at once for any one of them to stand easily for the whole. The difficulty, then, is not simply that modern politics has argued over the land. It is that modern politics inherited a past already crowded with memory, worship, loss, labor, and return. History can illuminate that burden. It cannot dissolve it. And the moment we ask this land for one decisive beginning, we are already asking the wrong question. People stayed, adapted, remembered, and inherited landscapes already marked by earlier lives. Leave your reading in the comments. When history is this layered, what does it change about the way you understand claims to the same ground? This is where we continue tracing the past without forcing it into a single beginning. And if you want to follow that thread further, watch Why Rome Renamed Judea to Palestine and Why It Didn't End There, where the struggle over naming shows how one layer of the past can be fixed into power without ever exhausting the history beneath it. Until next time, keep questioning, stay curious, and remember, history can illuminate that burden. It cannot dissolve it.